Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Thrive Co-Living Communities YouTube podcast. I'm Mark Stein, Thrive founder and your podcast host. We're creating sustainable, inclusive, and multi-generational residential communities. Our mission is to combat the epidemic of isolation, revitalize communities, and help others discover the many benefits of engaged community living by offering unique and ecologically sustainable co-living options. In this podcast series, join us as we discuss co-living, in addition to bringing you interesting people from around the world who are doing cool things to expand your knowledge and satisfy your curiosity. Through this podcast, learn more about our concept and see how Thrive co-living communities will bring together people from all walks of life who want to enjoy the best of independent and group living. To find out more about us, please visit our website at thrivecolivingcommunities.org. Thanks for watching and enjoy the podcast. All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Thrive Co-Living Communities YouTube podcast. Always a mouthful, and I'm grateful when I can get it out. So glad to have you here, and glad to have Gui Perdrix.
Yes, I guess we're getting there.
Perdrix.
Perdrix, Perdrix, I guess, however people want to pronounce it, right?
It's French, and I knew I wouldn't get it. Anyway, he is the director of CoLiv, an international co-living membership agency. Membership, what?
Association.
Yeah. So I've been wanting to have him on the podcast for a long time. So glad to have you. He's written a book just recently, and he's spearheading a Co-Liv Summit, which I'll ask him about real soon too. So welcome, Gui.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. I'm really stoked, and I'm really curious where this conversation is going to be going,
All right. Well, let's get started. So let's start with what led you to get interested in co-living. So give us a sketch of your journey.
Sure. I mean, my journey was, I'd say, a bit more unconventional in certain ways. And that is, even though I did some traditional university and bachelor, and after that, I decided to stop the university scene and started working in the startup scene in London and in Paris. And then around 7 years ago from now, I had a breakdown. I call it my quarter life crisis. And it made me to decide on certain choices, including becoming a minimalist. So I get rid of all of my items. I own like 70 items, more or less, that I travel with me. And being a nomad, meaning I still don't have an apartment 6 years later. And I go from one place to another. And so that led me to creating co-living spaces for me and my friends. And then became friends of friends. And we had this remote co-living concept. So basically we would open a co-living for 3 months on average in the city. So the first time was in Barcelona, then we moved to Mexico, and then we moved to Bali in Indonesia. And every time we had like between 8 and 20 residents who would co-live together. And so to me at the time, it was a lifestyle, and I did it for fun. I didn't do it for the business of itself. It wasn't profitable in any way. And for me, it was just being able to be surrounded by people that you love, or people you learn to love, and people that stimulate you, and in order to just have a better quality of life. And what I didn't realize was that co-living was truly transformative. And for me, I've had a past of depression, also when I was young, of drug abuse. And so I fundamentally care about helping people grow. And I realized that co-living was my entry into personal growth. It was the way that I was able to change people's lives. And we can talk, I can share with you a lot of stories, but even when I bring friends to co-living spaces and I see how much it changed their life. So that's what made me really curious about co-living. And then 3 years back, I decided to stop the co-living operations and not become just an operator, but I really wanted to work with everybody out there that was doing co-living and help them to do it right. Because, as you might know, but when you don't have certain processes in place, then it's really hard to create a great experience. And at the end of the day, you're dealing with humans, right? So you need to learn what are the right frameworks for people to feel safe, for people to feel heard, for people to feel empowered, for this whole community to run. And that's what I want to bring to the co-living industry. So that's what guided me into that, really, this knowing that co-living can be transformational if it's done right. And I made it my mission to help others make it right.
Very nice. Where are you from originally?
I grew up in, so my parents are French. I grew up in Germany in a small town of 30,000 people. And I spent a bit of time in Peru when I was 14. That really opened me up, especially to community. Like in Germany, we had like boys on one side and girls on the other, and people were laughing at each other. And when I went to Peru when I was 14, everybody was just like hugging, and I really felt this collective. And I actually kind of got depressed when I came back to Germany. I think I cried, every night for like a month. But it really marked me. And I was like, this is not the type of culture I want to be with. And it led me to then leaving Germany and continuing to France, to the US, to London, etc.
Let's take a detour and talk about the summit here at the beginning of the podcast, because that's coming up May 2nd. So talk a little bit about that, and then we'll back up and talk about the journey some more, and then the book. But I'd like to get this on the front end.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, so since I got into this whole co-living journey, one of the roles one of the ways I've been able to contribute to the co-living scene was by directing Co-Liv. And as part of Co-Liv being a nonprofit, we host a lot of events and create resources for co-living actors and professionals. And one of them is the Co-Liv Summit. So once a year, we host a big event. It's mostly virtual. Last year we had 850 people attending. So let's see this year, but I expect around 1,000. And the goal really is to highlight the leading actors, but also people are really innovating in industry so that it can help people that are creating co-living spaces and communities. And that's why also I know you're going to speak about, actually, do you want to share what you're going to speak on?
No.
We'll get to this later. Okay. But yeah, so it's going to be a big event of like a 10-hour long event, and with two main components. One component is networking. So we're having 2 hours of like virtual networking sessions where people are put in breakout rooms. They meet other operators, other developers, other community builders. And then at the same time, we'll have a lot of like experts like you who talk on very, very specific subjects. And we didn't go the whole route of like panels that are very hard to follow. We really wanted like expert content, kind of like TED Talk style, but for co-living.
And you also have some physical locations with the virtual.
Yeah.
So France and Germany? Tell us about those and where those are.
Yeah. So there's a couple of ways to join us, but like the main ones is like coming physically to the summit, which is going to be held in Bansko. It's like a ski resort in Bulgaria. And we're hosting it there because 2 days before, there's the co-working Bansko organization organizes a 2-day unconference around co-living. So that's one thing. And the other thing, there will be like certain viewing locations. So I'm pretty sure in France, people will be able to gather at La Maison de la Conversation, which is our HQ here, and be able to like see it live. But I guess like most people will attend in front of their screens or at home or maybe with colleagues at work and do a live stream there.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the formation of Co-Liv, since we're talking about the summit event. So when did you initiate that? And just talk a little bit about the development. And you seem to have great staff, probably many are volunteers, but and you host a lot of events. So talk a little bit about that.
Yes, I one of my dear friends, his name is Alex, and he runs one of the largest educational platform in France for entrepreneurs and for companies. And he always tells me when he looks at Co-Liv, he's like, I've never seen an organization like this. And I always ask him, I mean, not always, but I asked him the first time he said that, why? And he's like, because it's a big mess. There's it's very decentralized. So I'll give you an example. When I came into CoLiv, CoLiv was founded in 2016 by three people: Ryan Fix, Claire Furin, and Fabrice Simondi, who are all involved in co-living, and they just wanted to create this network of people that share resources and help each other out. And they hosted a summit, they wrote a book, and then the organization kind of, Claire left as a director. So just, there was this vacuum. And that's when I came in 2018, 19. And when I was coming in, it was Co-Liv sponsored me to do a world tour so that I could write a book about my findings on co-living. That's where the book came out. So that's also from Co-Liv. But it was very, very easy. So I started this world tour, and then I started creating events, and then I started taking ownership of the marketing, and then of social media channels, and then of finances, and it attracted a lot of people that really wanted to support. I remember one of the first ones really was Caterina Maiolini, who came in and really helped us out, like building out this entire movement. And then the pandemic hit, and this was amazing. I mean, it was bad on many sides, but it was amazing on one side for us, which was it was way easier to host events. Namely virtual events,
Right.
And people were craving for that, right? Like, I don't know about you, but I was for like a month also in a 25 square meter apartment, and I needed distraction, right? So, and this is where we grew. So we have a lot of volunteers, and they called our ambassadors, and it's usually a co-living operator or a community builder in one country that hosts event for this country and to grow the local community. And that worked really well. So we grew to like 45 ambassadors that hosted events for all around the globe. And still today, a lot of the efforts at Co-Liv, even half of the exec team at Co-Liv, is on a volunteer basis, because or their business is tied to co-living. So there's of course personal interest, and or because they also have a certain vision for where co-living should go. And actually everyone that we're with, that we're working with, has a vision of like co-living being more communal, being more inclusive, hoping for co-living one day to also be affordable. And that's where we want to push it towards. So yeah, in terms of organization and co-live, it's a very bottom-up approach. And what we're trying to really implement more and more is that approach, right? So there's still a lot of decisions that I do as director, but I know that there are certain models like teal organizations, holacracies, where the roles are so perfectly distributed that you don't need one person to approve all the finances. No, you have like each department creating their own finances, each department hiring their own stuff. We're not there yet, but that's where I'd love to see Co-Liv going. Because it would just represent really well also like the values that we represent, right? Just being community driven and yeah, so it's been a journey.
And I think it's quite possible, given the fervor that people feel for co-living, people that are in the field or want to be, they have such passion for it. So I think that model of decentralized decision-making might just work because of how motivated people are. It's interesting that the interest really grew with COVID, because COVID, at least at first, provided some real challenges for co-living communities. So they sort of, evidently, they sort of channeled that energy into virtual, and then that helped the organization grow virtually.
Yeah, it did. And I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, I was still part of, at the time, I was still co-founder of Co-Living Insights, which is a magazine on co-living. We brought out one edition online that was about like how co-living is during the pandemic. And it was challenging for a lot of people at the beginning, because they were like, how do we handle this? Do we have to close out the common spaces, etc.? But then realistically, when I talked to people that lived in community during that time, they just had a way better time than people that were isolated in a 20 square meter apartment, right? And so I'm personally, I was also very glad to have lived in co-living spaces during that time, right? To not be isolated by myself. It was, I think this is where the true power of community comes in, especially in these moments.
Do you think that long-term COVID will increase the interest in co-living, in that people who weren't necessarily that focused or appreciative of community really saw what it was like to be isolated. Do you think it's going to increase the interest in long term?
Yeah, I think, I don't know about the long term. I know, but I have my assumptions or an opinion around the short and midterm, which is, yes, it increased. And especially during the pandemic, I received a lot of messages of people who saying like, hey, I want to get a big house, move in with all of my friends. We can't stand the city anymore. It's locked down. And then they did that. I've been seeing a lot of people doing this. But now we're shifting to a point where COVID is kind of disappearing. It's disappearing from the news. It's disappearing from, here in France and Germany and Amsterdam, you don't need to wear a mask anymore. So it's kind of getting away. And I think that I'm seeing some people that during the pandemic, they were really into co-living. And now they're kind of back in a phase where they want to travel, where they still didn't get rid of their apartments. They're still living in big cities. So I definitely created a spark, and I think it created a spark for a lot of people that want to create co-living communities. And I don't know how it's going to be long term. Will people forget about this? Mm-hmm. Will people forget about that power? Because now again, you have the choice, and it's easier to just live by yourself. Mm-hmm. Is it more fulfilling and rewarding? That's another question. I don't think so, but it's easier. And I'm curious to see the people that used to co-live the last 2 years. Will they be co-living in the next couple of years? I don't know. And that leads also to another thing, or another angle, which is our needs develop over time, right? For example, I'm 29. I don't have a kid. So I can go into a co-living that's very dense and living in a house share with others. Maybe in 10 years, I will not be able to, or will not want to. And so hence here, maybe I might be more fit for co-housing than co-living. Right? Mm-hmm. So that too, we'll see how develop. But overall, just looking at everything that's happening, co-living is growing, and people are more aware of it.
And I've really been impressed from attending events, co-live events, where here's a group in the Nordics that's doing it. Here's a group in Africa, and it really seems like within the last few years to 5 years, and you can give me a better timeline on it, that the interest in co-living has just exploded. Putting aside that for some people, it will be a fad that once COVID is over, they may not be as enthused, but interest around the world seems to be really exploding. Do you find that? And do you have evidence of that?
Yes, let's concrete evidence. Just go to Google and go to Google Trends and type the word co-living in, and you're going to see a huge graph that just goes up like this. So that's I think the easiest evidence to showcase. Other evidence could be like the amount of operators or of businesses that want to now create and manage co-living spaces. I think when I started my journey, I found around 400 different brands, and last year I found around 800. Maybe now we're already at 1,000. I don't know. And then on top of that, you have all of the hotels and hostels that are also rebranding themselves co-living, which leads to another problem, which is now we don't even know what co-living is, right? And co-living is kind of like hospitality. It doesn't mean much. Mm-hmm. It means something probably to you and to me individually, but when you look at co-living, there's not a unified product or unified way of living. You have like smaller houses, you have big developments, you have hotels, hybrids that are being reconverted into studios and micro units. So overall, co-living is growing, but it's also growing in so many different directions. And I think there's a counter trend, which is now certain spaces don't want to call themselves co-living anymore. Especially, for example, like really small intentional communities, they want to differentiate themselves from the big for-profit entities that are really about scale and not focus on like experience. And I understand, and they want to go to communal living, or they really want to put the focus on what they're really about instead of just co-living. But yeah, overall it's growing. And when I meet people in the streets, they heard the term. Not everyone, but now like I talk to folks like, oh yeah, I heard the term. I even looked online when I was moving to Paris and I found this co-living, etc. It's getting into the mass market in terms of awareness, not in terms of adoption yet, but in terms of awareness.
Mm-hmm. You know, I experienced that phenomenon for the better part of my work life. I was a mediator of disputes. I still do some mediation. But when it first started, it was from a group of purists, if you will, who wanted to find an alternative to the court system as a way to resolve disputes. So early on, and I was part of that movement in the early to mid 80s. I'll date myself by saying that, but what the hell? And then we started gaining traction, and lawyers and judges started doing what they called mediation. And in our view, the purist view, it was a perversion of the concept. You know, they would put people in separate rooms and say, if I was a judge in your case, here's what I would do. And they would, anyway. So it sounds like the same thing is happening here, where, and I joked that when I retired as a mediator, I was going to put out a shingle and call myself a judge, you know, because they had no training. So it sounds like similar thing is happening in co-living, that people are just calling themselves co-living operations without any regard for what the underlying principles are. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and I guess you could also, it is accurate, and it was predictable, and it might also be a good news. So here's why. When I started doing my world tour 3 years back, I would say that I was more of the purist category, right? I was here of like, co-living changed my life. I experienced it. I lived in co-livings for like years. I want to bring that to others and have them experience the transformational power of co-living. And then I do my tour and I realize a lot of the people that are behind that have never lived in community. They don't know, they don't understand what it means to live in community. And so we can expect these people to create spaces and processes that will allow communities to flourish. But it's also these people that made the term co-living popular. And when we look at, for example, co-working, WeWork was, of course, the big actor that drove co-working to the masses. And WeWork had a lot of criticism for the non-community that was existing, or the non-existing community in their spaces. But at the same time, it also allowed to gain a lot of awareness around for co-working, for the term co-working. And now you're seeing a lot of like local co-working spaces showing up because people know what co-working is, because there's financing behind it, there's legal structures behind it, and they're benefiting from that. And so, of course, there's now big actors, even in the co-working sector, like spaces that just copied WeWork's model and go crazy. But in these spaces, you might not find a community you're looking for. Not that supportive community where you're going to find your freelancer that's going to work with you on digital ads and then blah, blah, blah. But these organizations are helping smaller, more grassroots, local purists to also strive, or to at least being recognized. And I'm seeing that with co-living as well, right? Like even at the Co-Liv Summit, there's a lot of the speakers are coming from these more like grassroots, small co-living spaces. And they're very thankful to all of these big players that have existed, because these big players were also able to fund initiatives like Co-Liv, right? That then are able to give back to these smaller players. So I would see it more as a tandem. And I agree with you, there is a complete diversification. There's sometimes misusage of the term co-living, and some people get annoyed. And that's why we also, within Co-Liv and a few friends, we created this term called faux living. Faux in French means wrong, or like even like fake, right? In this case. So those that call themselves co-living but aren't real co-living, they're faux living. But and it's like FAUX minus living.info. So, and we just put a little text like, are you really a co-living operator? But that's, we can make these jokes, but at the same time, I think overall, we can also be grateful for these large players to exist. And they too are trying to solve a problem, but it's not the problem really of finding your community and finding your core friends. Here it's more of, I want to move to a new city. I don't want to go through an agency. I want to just like being able to move in, move out really quickly, have my privacy while at the same time being able to meet people until I find my future roommates and move out with them. And that too is, it's valid. It's a very valid product, and I think should be supported. So I myself also changed my view and became, it's not about being a purist versus not being a purist, about understanding where you can put the purity into and where you can put other things into other baskets.
Mm-hmm. It brings to mind the book quite a number of years back called The Tipping Point. And
I heard of that.
A certain percentage of the population needs to know about a concept in order to have this tipping point. I want to say 30%, so not a majority, but a significant minority. And then, there's this tipping point. I think a similar industry at a similar point would be electric vehicles. People are just beginning to see it. And then we have this war with Ukraine and Russia affecting Europe's energy. Anyway, I won't go down that. I do want to ask you, this came up in a conversation on the podcast not too long ago, and I'd love to hear your view on it. That, do you think that this peaking of interest in co-living has anything to do with global warming and the tension, the fragility that people feel around this event that is, as I understand it, quite likely, and not only is making us, a certain percentage of the population, more sensitive to sustainability and environmental issues, but wanting to hold on to each other and hug each other and be closer, and not miss human interaction. Do you think global warming has anything to do with it, with this growth of interest?
I would say that yes, but just for a very, very few minority, like percentage of everything is happening. The reason why I say yes is because one of my friends, actually, I'm staying here at her place. Her name is Marjolaine, and she joined a project that was run by my other friend, Adrien, called Le Moulin, which means the windmill. It's like a location an hour and a half in the south of Paris. And they took an old, windmill that also has like a bunch of rooms and common areas. And they're very much into sustainability, especially Adrien. He really is into it. And so for him, it's a sustainability project. It's learning to be more resourceful, and then everything in that co-living space is locally sourced, and they all try not to take the plane, and et cetera, and basically finding their diversity, their social diversity within that co-living framework, instead of like having to travel outside. So yes, I think for some people it is a drive. I think it would be not correct to say though that the entire movement or even a majority of the movement is being driven by that. But even the other analogy I could see is that when you look at new developments, sustainability is being taken more and more seriously or sincerely. But here again, it's not the main driver.
Got it. Okay, so let's talk about the book. Finally, we're getting around to the topic. So you will just talk about how it came together. Sounds like it was a co-live project. Talk about your travels and some of your experiences and what you learned.
Yeah. So yeah, it was so basically here's the thing. When I realized back like four years ago, after my breakdown, after hosting these co-living spaces, that co-living was transformative, I thought the best thing I could do right now is to learn from everyone that's doing co-living. And my idea was to create this like global co-living tour, which then would also bring out a podcast of the people I interview and articles and blogs, etc. And then when I was being put in touch with Co-Liv, we decided together that they would sponsor this world tour, and in exchange, I would write a book about it, which I thought would be great, right? For two reasons. Of course, there's the obvious branding reason that the book helps you to promote yourself. But more frankly, and especially now having been an author, I think that it's the best way to tap into somebody's brain. And, you know, when I have, let's say, a call with someone that wrote a book, there's probably 50 to 80% of the questions I might find some answers in this book, because that person took, you know, hundreds of hours of the time to write down what's in their brain. So to me, this book was, well, it was an agglomeration of around like 50 co-living space visits. So what I would do, I went to 30 different cities, and I would do two things. The first thing I would do is I would hit up everybody on LinkedIn that used to work or that worked at a time in the co-living industry, and just tell them, hey, we're hosting the first event of co-living professionals at this bar. Come next Thursday, 7 p.m., etc. And then I facilitated that, introduced everyone to each other. The competitors for the first time were meeting, phone numbers were exchanged. And so that was the origin of the Co-Liv events. These like physical events I would host. And then by meeting all of these folks, I would then ask them, hey, can I come and interview you? Can I come visit your space? And what I tried to do is trying to find the golden nuggets out of everyone I interviewed. So I knew that maybe if you're a co-living operator, there's probably one thing you do better than anyone else. And my job was to figure out that one thing. I didn't care about the other 99%. I just had to know, like, in which domain is it? Is it business models? Is it like architecture? Is it space activation, community activation, processes, etc.? And once I figured something out, then I would really drill down. And then all of these learnings, then I had to categorize them and then put them into a framework, which is then the book, right? And so this book is really about giving an introduction, actually not an introduction, giving a deep introduction into each of the co-living pillars. So I identified 12, but these can be like the co-living concept, the space, design and architecture, the business model, levels of engagement of residents, even like behavioral principles of residents. And it digs deep into all of this with different types of examples. And one thing I always say is, to me, co-living is a science in a way that if you apply certain rules and processes, then you're guaranteed to have a better community or a better experience or a better usage of your space or a more robust business model. So it's a science, but it's also an art. And the art lies in, you know, applying that science to whatever your vision is. It's kind of like a painter. It's a science to learn how to paint, but the art comes for like putting your imagination onto that, right? So it doesn't matter whether you have the same stroke techniques than Da Vinci. You don't have his brain and heart and drive. So you're not Da Vinci. So that's yeah, it digs really deep into a lot of different subjects, and it took me like 3 years to write. And again, I'm very grateful to everyone that was interviewed in the process. It was, I think I'll write a second book, but probably not such a big research topic. I think that was kind of like my master thesis, you know, that I didn't do. Kind of felt like that, almost like more like PhD. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad it was such a good experience for you. I wrote a book many years ago about mediation, and it was I'm not a writer at heart, and it was one of the more painful experiences of my entire life. I do say that I have the closest idea of what physical childbirth is like as a result of that. And I think the similarity is, for me anyway, that near the end of the childbirth, I hear certain women say, I don't care what it looks like, just get it out of me. And that was my plea at the end. So for you to have another one in you after that experience, I applaud you.
Thanks. But it's, yes. And I guess, there's different ways of communicating, right? So podcast is one way, right? Like videos is another, transcript. And even, to be honest, it might sound a bit weird, but Twitter is the opposite of writing a book, because Twitter forces you to get high clarity on your thoughts. And sometimes the point of like books is you have to find this right balance between like repeating a story or repeating something so that people really internalize it. But then you have certain books where people repeat themselves so often that you could take 400 pages and put them onto 20, right? So there's a fine balance between the two. And especially when you write about topics, I don't know how it was for you with mediation, but for me, it was a new topic. So it was really a research project. And it was hard, like putting everything into like the right structure, making sure like I missed no information from all of these interviews, going back to all of the notes, and then writing and then rewriting and then re-editing. And I had the same thing. There were so many writer's block and I wanted like everything to be perfect. And there was like 5 design revisions and everybody, my mom was calling me, was like, when is your book finally out? It's been 3 years. And I'm like, soon it will. So it went from 2020 to 2021 to finally 2022 being released. But now I'm happy. And now I'm definitely not going to be as a perfectionist next time, I guess, because there's also a certain value of just getting your things out. I have 3 books I never published. They're just sitting there and I probably will never publish them.
Yeah. Another comparison I heard to childbirth is that at the end for women, I understand, is so painful, but there's a certain block of memory about it. And that's what lets women have another child afterwards, that they don't remember how painful it was. So as you were talking about your journey, I was thinking about all of these different operators, these different founders of these co-living spaces. And on one end of a spectrum, I envision a person that's sort of like you, that's very friendly and outgoing, and the kind of person that could get a party started and welcome everybody. So very extroverted on the one end of the spectrum. And then I also can see how introverts who are thinking about this and are very technologically focused on technique and processes, and that they could be founders too. What did you find in terms of the personalities of these founders, organizers of co-living spaces, and which ones seem to be the most successful or have the most success in their spaces?
I love that question. And actually, I would say that there's actually a sort of separation, or like these 2 types that you mentioned, the extroverts and versus the introverts. I've seen, for example, a lot of like these extroverted people, and these founders who also live in a co-living space. So more of like grassroots co-living spaces, or founders that start with like 1 or 2 locations, and that live also within community. They're usually more of that typology. And then the other type is more someone that's more analytical, probably coming from an investment background or real estate background. And it comes under this angle. So here the types of projects are usually larger. There's usually investors involved, there's scale involved. But then of course, it's an overgeneralization. I could also mention you people who are actually very introverted and live in co-living, and people who are very extroverted and build large projects. But I would say there's a tendency for sure. And on top of that, one thing also that was surprised was when I was visiting co-living spaces, I asked one of the largest co-living space operators, like, do you have more extroverts or introverts? And they actually did personality tests on their residents, and they had more introverts than extroverts. And I think it's a common misconception to think that only extroverted people would live in co-living, because you can be introvert and still be very social. It's just you're going to need 1 hour social time a day instead of like 8. And you might need to retrieve in your personal space to recharge versus having a beer with someone to recharge, right? Or kombucha. And so you have co-living spaces that are run by founders who are way more introverted, and on top of that also way more, for example, shy, which is not the same thing, right? And that's okay, because they also attract a certain type of culture, right? It might be more of the, like, for example, the spaces that are really attracting a lot of like tech developers. It's usually people who are more like introverted, need a lot of like self-care time, a lot of time in front of their computer and the screens, and are super social. But it's great to live around other people like this, because again, you know, like it's easier to coordinate your food, and it's easier to pay your rent, and it's easier to share amazing spaces and locations, and you're probably gonna end up working together too. But yeah, it's yeah, there's definitely different types of acts involved.
Sure. And for example, with me, I prefer to work alone. I would not want to work in a co-working space in a co-living community. But after hours, you know, I much prefer to be social and be out and that sort of thing. So talk about some of the cool experiences that you had in your travels. Which places pop to you, pop out in your mind, fun, unusual, creative environments? Talk about some of that experience.
Yes. All right, let's go. So there's a couple. I'd say that there's a bunch of places that I really, really liked. For example, one was Treehouse in California. I don't know if you've heard of them, but it was founded by a guy called Prophet, who also has an incredible story, who was like part of gangs in his childhood and went to jail up to like reconverting and now creating this community. And it's a ground-up development building, only 28 units, only 28 residents, super highly curated, super inspiring. If you go to the Instagram, like I haven't seen any place that looks so beautiful, with like a lot of greenery and a lot of like warm pink, yellow colors. And so that was pretty inspirational. To be honest, I've had like a lot of great experiences living in co-living spaces. One doesn't exist anymore, but it was called Sunshine Embassy. It was in Mallorca. It was run by this woman called Paula, who was like one of the most welcoming, like Spanish, totally extroverted, exactly hugging personalities. And it just created this amazing vibe of people really being open towards one another, having lots of fun. And then there were like some places also that were like super chaotic. I'm not gonna name like who that was, but where, you know, I was on the couch, and then somebody comes in and says like, yeah, I just got someone with me. Can you please leave so that we can have sex on the couch? I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. No, there's like the entire spectrum. Some of the really cool places as well, where one was called Urban. Oh yeah.
Let me interrupt you.
Yeah.
I have this vision of you saying, wait, let me move my computer before you do that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Like, let me stop the podcast 1 second.
Go ahead. Sorry.
So yeah, and then of course there's a lot of other spaces that were really cool in the US. One was called Haven Co-Living. There was like super dense. People were sleeping in pods, but then they had like amazing amenities for like less than 1K a month, all inclusive, and there's a cinema inside, and they turned the garages into yoga rooms. And then there was another one, or there still is another one, called Urban Campus. And their first location in Madrid is also like really, really cool. And they created these different types of clusters. So you have like different apartments with 5 people each, but then like 3 apartments share a common living room. So you have these like smaller communities of 15 people. And then in the entire building, you have 70 people total. And then you have like a mentorship / buddy system, where like as a new resident, you get paired up with an older one that integrates you within the community. And they made sure that this older person is not on the same floor as them, so that like they actually move around floors. So that was like, this was kind of the next level in terms of like thinking, how can we create processes for communities? And here that, yeah, the people, there's some people that really push that a lot. And another one, Carlos de la Lama from Startup Embassy, who lived for 7 years in his co-living in Palo Alto in San Francisco, who understands like human dynamics perfectly. And like his big thing is like, how can we use IoT to actually influence or at least track human behavior? So even small things such as creating a connected device on a trash bin, seeing like how many times it's actually left open because it's full, which then indicates that within the community, residents are not taking out the trash, which means that the systems internally is broken, right? So, and I know like there's companies like WeWork that already have done like through camera analysis, like where people spend their time so that they can improve their spaces. But it really goes further, and you have like some people where you just sit with them for like hours on one subject, and I just love doing that.
What about Bali? Bali was the first co-living location that I was aware of. Did you go to Bali?
Yeah. So I had my co-living there for 4 months in Ubud. Were you in Bali as well?
No. That was just the first that I became aware of it. Some on the coast and some up in the mountains.
Yeah. So Bali has a few co-living spaces, mostly for remote workers and digital nomads, because it's not really for locals at this point. And the thing with Bali is that a lot of these residents that they come mostly in for like 1 month periods. So they go to Bali for a month, or they might stay longer, but they use the co-living space just as a landing pad for them to get to know like their friends, the people, etc. And then they can move out, because getting a location, you can rent a house for $300 in Bali, and a co-living space is 900, right? So there's a financial trade-off, but like the difference comes from being able to live with people that's going to lift you up, that might help you out, that you're going to become friends with, and there's no price tag for these things. And I would say it's worth the investment, right? But so that's Bali. Bali is it's very specific, and that's why in the book I created like a cultural map of all of the different types of co-living cultures. And in Bali, I think I called it something like the landing pad, because it was a lot of these co-living spaces where people go more like short, medium term, I would say, like 1 month, and then use that to continue their journey. Versus like here in Paris, for example, or in London, the average stay is 12 to 18 months, right? So different intention,
right?
But it fits the intention there, and it works really well,
Sure.
And as a starting digital nomad, if you come to a place like this, it's amazing because you just meet a lot of people.
Right. So what surprised you in your journey? And let's first talk about not the book itself, but what surprised you in your journey about either yourself or where you went and what you discovered.
Okay.
What did you not expect?
So there's a couple of things. All right, it's gonna be funny. So the first thing, to be frank, that I didn't expect was for people in the co-living industry to be super open. So looking back, dang, there were like so many people that actually said yes to meeting in person, even though they were super busy with the things, and really took the time. So that was super positive. The thing I didn't expect on a personal level is that I became director of Co-Liv, which means I became my own publisher, which means I kept extending my own deadlines, which is not good.
Who's going to crack the whip? Nobody.
No one. And I told myself the story would crack the whip, but I didn't. And I then wrote other books in the meanwhile and stuff, right? So and then you know pretty well the writer's block probably and stuff. And so like, yeah, I allowed myself also for this project to take longer. There's been a lot of different learnings for me. The journey was also, I was still starting to establishing myself in the co-living scene. So I didn't have at the time any consulting clients. I didn't have any revenue source. And the way that we financed this tour was that we would find sponsors that would all pitch in a bit of amounts to get featured in the book. And this way we could finance a tour. But when I became director of Co-Liv, suddenly it was like up to me to find these sponsors. And there were a lot of moments where also I learned to be broke, which was a really great thing. But at the same time, for some reason, magically, everything kind of always happened, right? Like there's always been like one website client or consulting client that eventually started coming in and created a baseline for this project and for myself to continue. And And that's, that fear of sometimes like, I wouldn't say I have a financial fear of being broke, but that fear of sometimes not making it financially, even with your organization, right? Because you have responsibilities on your shoulder. I think really, I learned to breathe during that time. And I'm still having this right now of the Co-Living Summit. I'm like, are we going to sell enough tickets to make this profitable? Are we going to find enough partners? But I know it'll figure it out itself, right? And so it learned me to be more chill. And then it challenged me. It challenged me a lot because I kept on traveling. I was exposed in so many different environments. I had zero groundedness. I needed to learn to be more grounded. I needed to learn there was a time where I really had to do like a meditation daily in order to feel more grounded. And even still today, I'm still a bit struggling with this, but like doing sports and also being able to say no to alcoholic drinks just because somebody wants to meet you at a bar, but it's a Wednesday and you want to treat your body well. So like finding that balance between all of the opportunities you have when you travel versus your own intentions. That's been a big teacher. It's been a big teacher.
Very nice. And let me point something out. Your publisher did make sure that you were successful. So you got this book out. So your publisher yourself did crack the whip and got it done. So
yes, we did it. It was some teamwork, took some time, but we had our differences, but we managed them.
Fighting it out.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I could ask a million other questions, but let me ask one, and then let's talk, get details, and we'll put those in the show notes. But what have you not talked about that you wanted to or would like to say? And then we'll talk about the book and the summit. But
yeah,
what else would you like to share about co-living and about your experience that we haven't talked about or that I didn't ask?
Yeah. And that was actually the thing that just popped up in my head in terms of like the key learning, which is I hear very few people talking about co-living from a psychology perspective. And what I mean is when you live with other people in a condensed space, which is what co-living is, it is normal that you're going to have moments where you get triggered, moments where you get annoyed, moments where you are angry. And here comes the whole thing around how do we handle this as a group? So how do we handle conflict as a group? And for that, I think there's way too little resource information. For example, if you have a case of sexual assault or physical abuse in your space, how do you deal with that on the spot? What is the process to follow? Do you kick people out? Do you have to put them into a room? Do you bring in the entire community to discuss around that subject? It's very delicate, but co-living ultimately is a representation of society, and these things happen in society. So being prepared for that, I think, is key. And unfortunately, a lot of co-living operators have to go through these things because they haven't been prepared for it, and it might fuck things up. Apologies for my language, but it does. Because when you have sometimes such an incident and it's not handled well, it can ruin the entire vibe. You can have the core residents who leave, and your house can be as beautiful as you want, but if the core people who were making this happen are not there anymore, you're in trouble. So that's one. And then the second thing is co-living in relationship to personal growth. Because we have a tendency to, when we are annoyed, to communicate it to the other person, right? And here too, most of us don't know how to communicate it. So a lot of people, if for example, I have a habit of cleaning the table, and you keep on leaving this glass of water on the table, I might just go to you one day and I'm gonna be grumpy. You're gonna be like, "Is everything okay?" And I'll be like, no, I'm good. And then you're gonna be, "Are you sure?" And I'm like, "Well, you know what? Like, you leave this glass on the table the whole time," and blah, 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 right? Then I explode. So what happened here? What happened is that I had a trigger around, I'm being triggered when you leave the glass on the table. I did not express my needs in time as they showed up, or I didn't adjust my needs, right? Another way to deal with that is to also look inside and to be like, is it really worth it fighting for this glass? And why am I getting triggered just about being such a perfectionist on cleanliness, right? Like, maybe I want to give this up. Maybe it doesn't serve me anymore. It's creating more drama than it doesn't. And this way of looking inside of you when these conflicts happen, that's not the natural default state of 99% of human beings. And that is where co-living can be very, not dangerous, but where it can become a source of conflict when you have people that deal with problems differently. And you have some people that will take things on themselves and be like, yes, it's my fault. I'm sorry, I overreacted. I'm going to learn how to not get triggered by this anymore. And you have others who don't have this perspective and they're going to keep on putting the blame on others. And there's just no compromise to be found here because the second person has not learned and truly doesn't want to look within. And I truly believe that co-living can be a school of life if you have a mindset of, in psychology, it's called not extreme ownership, but internal locus of control, right? So I don't know if the term resonates, but it's basically when you take responsibility for everything that happens to you, you know, even if a drama happens to you, well, it's okay, you take it on you. You're not going to blame the outside world. Versus an external locus of control where you think that the world dominates you and you're a victim of that world. And it's really hard to reminding yourself, or at least to creating the illusion of we're in control. Because even if it's an illusion, at least it's a better one because the only thing you can change is yourself. So here I'm ramping a bit, but I'm ramping because I really wish that more people can live in co-living and therefore learn to understand themselves better, to be in control or like to be responsible, not only for their actions, but also for their emotions, and using these moments of conflict to understand whether these things actually should be problems they want to tackle or not. And, you know, we all have our childhood traumas and we all have these moments that shaped us and it made us who we are, and that's fine. But we're also modular and we can change that. And I think co-living is a great teacher for that if you're open-minded, but it takes a lot of facilitation, and it takes a lot of curation, and it takes a lot of patience.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that because that's what I've been thinking about lately. Somebody asked me what the biggest challenge will be when we create our co-living space, and we're still in the latter conceptual stage. And the term radical acceptance came into my life recently, and I understand it's not a new concept. Tara Brach wrote a book. She's a Buddhist teacher, wrote a book 10, 15 years ago. But that term really grabbed me. And I thought and have been thinking about this, that I think being able to radically accept what other people do, like the glass and you know, it's hard enough if we're partnered with someone and we separate ourselves based on these thoughts that she cannot pick up that glass off the table. So I am different. She is different from me. And that engenders a certain behavior that then becomes separating. And I think that's why we live as separately as we do, because we cop attitudes so quickly and so easily about our neighbors. So we have to live physically apart from people in order to not kill each other, in terms of this lack, and it's a lack of emotional intelligence and a lack of work that makes it so challenging. But I agree with you. I think that's the challenge, and that people, that the greatest growth potential for people in co-living is learning, going through this and challenging ourselves to go through it, not only with a partner, but with multiple people in the community living closer together. And that the personal growth from that can just be tremendous and liberating to find out what's important. And Tara Brach says that it starts with forgiving ourselves and being accepting of ourselves in order to have that kind of acceptance for others. and I'm still investigating that. Okay, where is the lack of acceptance in myself that leads me to cop this attitude about someone else? So.
Yes, it's I maybe we can put in the footnotes, but this book, which I forgot the name, I forgot the author. It's a monk, a Buddhist monk, and it's on love, and he describes love as understanding. Love and understanding is for him is complete synonym. In the sense of, if you do not understand someone else's behavior, if you don't understand where they're coming from, you cannot love them. Which also means that if you do something that I don't understand and I get annoyed and defensive and triggered, I didn't understand something about myself and where this own trigger came from. And so I guess on one side, and I don't have an answer here, right? Because on one side you could say, me, Mark, I'm going to do the work to radically accept everyone that's in my life, and I'm going to really be grateful and just accept them with their defaults in every way. That's fine, right? But then you will accept any type of person, and maybe with behaviors that are very, very hard to handle with, like maybe somebody that steals and somebody that's physically violent and stuff. And I think, and then there's always this limit of what are your needs then? You know, do you give up on your needs, or do you also have a certain vision of like how you want to live, how you want your community to live? Do you want your community to use nonviolent communication, etc., because it's just easier? And so I guess here, maybe it's not so much about radical acceptance in the sense of, I think we can all do a better job and learn to accept everyone and to be able to love unconditionally everyone. And that doesn't mean that we choose to live with them. Right? We can have preferences on the type of lifestyle we want to have just because it's easier. And yet it doesn't mean that we're neglecting someone else. It's just we're setting our own boundaries to what we want to have in our life, without saying the other one is bad. It's just different. And it's just not my life's vision. It's not my life's story, but it's somebody else's story, and they're valid. We're at least treating them with respect and kindness. Right?
Mm-hmm. By the way, it sounds like Thich Nhat Hanh on love.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's get these dates down for the summit and where people can find out about the Co-Liv Summit, and then the title of your book and where they can get your book. Is it a physical book only? Is it an ebook? Is an ebook on the way? Tell us that, and we'll put it in the show notes.
Super. Then it's very simple, I guess. Like, yeah, the two main ways, you know, to get yourself into the co-living industry is like, one, through getting the book. So here it's really more like practical knowledge, lots of different types of examples of how to create and run a co-living space. It goes deep into every subject, business models, architecture, community building. And here would be on artofcoliving.co. And right now it's only a physical version because we designed it to be a physical workbook with like literally notes that you can take it in. It's colorful, etc. And we're working right now on a Kindle version. So it will come out, but probably in a month or two. And if you have the choice, I'd recommend getting the physical book because I really wanted to create something. I was really inspired by this book called Spaces for Innovation. It was also like really beautiful inside. And I was like, I want to create something like this, just even better. So I don't know whether I did it better. And that's not the point. The point is get it physically if you can. And online product will come out maybe in a month or so. And for the summit, it's happening on May 2nd of this year. So in 3 weeks from right now when we're recording, maybe when the podcast is out, it's like 2 weeks or so. So May 2nd, 2022. And here you can join from anywhere around the world. And also if it's not in your time zone, which is totally understandable, all of the recordings will then be published online so that everyone can re-listen in so that you don't miss any talks. And here it's at colivsummit.co. And so it's COLIV summit.co. And it's 49 euros to attend. And our philosophy is very simple. For those who can't afford that, they can very simply shoot us an email and we'll give them a discount. And if they still can't afford it, they can enter for free. And the philosophy, I took that from a guy called Peter Graham, I think, I forgot, but who has a newsletter and podcast where you have to pay 100 euros a year $100 a year. And he's like, if you can afford that, that's fine. Just shoot us an email. Same thing. We'll give you 50% discount. And if it still doesn't work, we'll give it to you for free. Money shouldn't be in access to education. And at the same time, education should be valued for those who can, right? So just wanted to share that because actually I haven't heard any other organization having a model like this. And I really want to emphasize it. So if it's too much for you, just shoot us an email. That's okay. And if not, just appreciate the work and join us and make the most out of it.
Wonderful. And then CoLiv.org, the organization is co-liv.org for people to join the organization. And I think it's $100 a year, if I remember correctly. So it's very affordable, and lots of programming, for operators and coordinators, and several events per week it seems to average. So, well, yeah. I want to thank you so much for this opportunity to meet and hear about your travels and your book, and a lot of gratitude for what you're doing and for the journey and that you've been on, and the energy that you're putting into the Co-Liv movement. So thanks so much. I look forward to contributing any way that I can to the movement. So thank
you. Thank you, Mark, for this opportunity. And I think the same words go back to you. Thank you for making the time to creating this content. Thank you for everything you do with Thrive co-living communities. And let's see where this goes. But I think it's just the beginning. So
wonderful. All right. Well, and thanks everyone for joining us. We're here every week, and we're just starting to promote these podcasts ahead of time. And so if you'll look down in the show notes, you can download a calendar of our different podcasts and join us up front to ask questions of people just like Guy that are doing great things, not only in the co-living space, but we cover all sorts of topics of interest. I feel like people that are into co-living are also voracious readers and are curious about all sorts of things. So we have had someone who was recently the CIA director on cybersecurity. We've had people talking about cryptocurrency, all sorts of topics of interest. And so we invite you, if you're in a co-living space or just interested in co-living, we're doing programming just for you on co-living topics and any topic that's of interest. So Guy, thanks again. And thanks to everybody. And there's all sorts of ways that you can find out about Thrive co-living communities and support us in the show notes. So look down below. And Guy, I hope to have you on again. We have a lot more to talk about.
I think so too. Can't wait.
Thanks for joining us for another great episode of the Thrive Co-Living Communities YouTube podcast. To learn more about our mission and how you can support our vision of creating co-living communities worldwide, please visit us at thrivecolivingcommunities.org. To receive advanced viewings of our podcast and other exclusive content, find us on Patreon at patreon.com/Thrive Co-Living Communities. You can also learn more ways to support our mission in the show notes below. Amazon, Smile, GoFundMe, Kroger, and our own Thrive Gear store, where you can buy t-shirts, hats, and many other items. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.